Let me now introduce Jim Dwyer, current president of SCAL International USA, who will make some opening remarks and continue with some introductions.
Thank you very much, Eric. Very pleased today to have Christine Duffy and Roger Dow as our presenters. This is, again, continuing our webinar series of tourism updates for our SCAL members and non-SCAL members alike. And we always ask you to get other travel people involved in these webinars since they're so important. The cruise industry is near and dear to my heart. I started out in the airline industry and migrated to the cruise industry several years ago. And I'm now a travel agency that specializes in cruises. So we are really hoping to hear good news from Christine this morning. And she will be followed by Roger Dow, who will give us some updates on travel in general. Christine is the president of Carnival Cruise Lines. Roger, as you know, is CEO and president of U.S. Travel Association. We hope to continue these webinars. This is the last one for at least this month and possibly next, but we may continue them again. Well, we will continue them again in September. And as Eric stated, we will post this on our website. So look for it if you were not able to tune in. Right now, I'll turn it over to Morgan Maravich, who will continue the proceedings. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome everyone. It is a pleasure to have you all with us today, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Christine Duffy and Roger Dow. Roger Dow is the president and CEO of U.S. Travel Association, the DC-based organization representing all segments of travel in America. U.S. Travel's mission is to increase travel to and within the United States. As a leading travel industry advocate, Dow and his team regularly confer with administration and congressional leaders to advance policies that benefit the broader travel industry. His efforts have resulted in major legislative victories, including securing pandemic-related relief for the hard-hit travel industry, establishing and renewing Brand USA, the highly effective National Travel and Tourism Promotion Program, and procuring funds to maintain America's treasured national parks. As many of you know, Roger comes from a very strong hospitality background, to include Marriott. And now to also introduce Christine Duffy. Christine is the president of Carnival Cruise Line, certified as a great place to work and the flagship brand of Miami-based global cruise industry leader Carnival Corp, the world's largest leisure travel company. As president, she captains a company that sails a fleet of 24 ships, annually hosts nearly 6 million guests, and employs more than 43,000 people who hail from 110 nations around the globe. Celebrating 6 years with Carnival Cruise Lines, Christine joined the company in 2015 after a successful tenure as president and CEO of the Cruise Lines International Association, otherwise known as CLIA, which represents the $120 billion global cruise industry. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you, Morgan. So I jump right into it. I should say, Jim, it's nice to meet you and thrilled to hear that you are a cruise-only travel agency, so I'm sure you're happy that we're finally sailing again. So let me begin by sharing a little bit of our journey these past 16 months, which has been pretty incredible, like so many of us in the travel and hospitality industry. If we go to the first slide, you can see that all cruise ships, which you may be aware in the US, actually worldwide, last March of 2020 were put into what we called a pause, which essentially meant we stopped operations for guests and the ships were put into layup status, operating with minimum manning. And as I say, unlike our friends at the airlines where you can park a plane in the desert if you don't need it, all of our cruise ships from across the industry had to continue to be manned and maintained. Ultimately, we used our ships after we had safely debarked any of the guests that were remaining on ships. Remember, we had cruise lines that were on world cruises that had to get guests back to their home ports. And I think this number is probably off because Carnival Cruise Line the brand that I lead, we repatriated 30,000 crew members. Carnival Corporation, which Carnival is obviously part of, but we operate and own 9 cruise lines. We repatriated 70,000. So I think just for our corporation, the number was 100,000 crew members. So you can start multiplying that when you consider all of the other cruise lines in the industry. We started out trying to use obviously commercial travel for air to get crew members home. That quickly shut down. It became very expensive to use charter aircraft. So ultimately, we used cruise ships to repatriate our crew members. The process took many, many months, and we obviously sought, expertise from outside public health and medical experts. We worked across various governments. As you heard Morgan say, we have crew members that come from over 120 countries, and we had some countries that refused to take their own citizens back because of COVID. And we actually, in May, were able to get the last crew members back home that were still on the ship for all that time. So it was really incredible when you consider the magnitude and the logistics. Now, if you go to the next slide, while everything closed in March, in Europe, cruise lines were able to begin operating again, also in Asia and South Pacific in July. So it was interesting because between that time and spring of 2021, more than 500,000 people were able to take cruises in Europe and in Asia without vaccines. So there were no protocols at that time when we restarted sailing in other parts of the world. So most of the protocols were focused on testing, on physical distancing, and on mask wearing, bubble tours, which is what we refer to our shore excursions, where people are not able to tour independently. And so that occurred. I think there were fewer than 50 positive cases, all of which were handled without incident. So the success of those sailings really, I think, helped demonstrate that here in the US, the conditional sail order that we were operating under really needed to be updated. Clearly, we could begin sailing again in a safe way to keep our guests, our crew, and the destinations where we bring our ships healthy and safe. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about where we sort of how things evolved in the US. The CDC had issued a conditional sail order at the end of October in 2020. And we were working hard as an industry to implement protocols from a healthy sail panel that had been established and had really no idea at that time that vaccines would be available. When vaccines became available before the end of the year, it was at the same time that we were going through the presidential elections and the transition. Obviously, the commitment and the promise from the new administration was to focus on getting vaccines distributed. And so we waited pretty patiently as the CDC did not update the guidance for cruise lines. So we were still not operating. Now, at that point, there were cruise lines who became very, I'll say, frustrated, concerned, because we are able to move our ships. So there were several cruise lines who decided to move ships from US home ports to ports outside of the US, including the Caribbean, from the Bahamas to St. Martin to Bermuda, with the idea that Americans could fly to those destinations, could board a cruise, take their cruise. Clearly, that had a significant impact on jobs in the US in port communities that rely on the cruise industry. And I'm talking about direct jobs. If you add in or consider all of the indirect economic impact that port communities rely on from the cruise industry, whether it's hotel drivers, Uber drivers, taxis, all of the people that come in ahead of their cruise and stay in the port area before joining, those places had no business. So you'll see in the photo here, this was an event that Governor DeSantis held in Port Canaveral. This is a brand new terminal that was built by Port Canaveral in anticipation of Carnival, our newest ship, Mardi Gras. And this terminal was opened and sat empty for a year. So this event included cruise industry executives along with the governor, the attorney general, many of the other local officials and state officials for Florida. And at that, it was actually a call for the CDC to come back to the table and work with the industry so that we could begin sailing from US home ports. At Carnival, I like to say we're America's cruise line. We sail from 14 US home ports around the country. We decided not to move our ships, but it was at this event where I said, we may not have a choice if we could not get some clarity on when we would be able to begin operating again. Meanwhile, we had been canceling cruises month after month. We canceled 3.8 million passengers that were booked on cruises up to the point where we were able to begin operating again just 2 weekends ago. Now, as you may know, following this event, subsequently, Governor DeSantis did file a lawsuit calling for the CDC to lift the conditional sail order, and governors from Texas and Alaska followed suit. So it was really those events that got CDC back again, working with us to provide clarity and recognition that we now had vaccines. So the original conditional sail order needed to be updated. If you go to the next slide, as I said, we are back now in the US, and many of the cruise lines that had announced sailings from other countries outside the US, Caribbean in particular, many of those cruises ended up being canceled, and people brought ships back to the US home ports, which is what we felt was so critical and important all along. And Celebrity Edge was the first cruise ship to sail from Port Everglades at the end of June. For Carnival Cruise Line, the shot that you see here is Carnival Vista, which sails from Galveston, Texas. And you can see we are crewed at 100%. We were able to provide vaccines to all of our crew members as they returned back to the US from their home countries. All of the crew members had to go into a 14-day quarantine after being tested, then vaccinated, then quarantined. So as we explained to the CDC and to many of the other policymakers that were so helpful to us, you know, we can't just turn on like a light switch. It takes a lot of planning, travel, coordination, and we needed vaccines. We were also very, very grateful to get vaccines from the state of Florida and also in Texas from the University of Texas, and their medical branch provided vaccinations. We had a ship that went to Mobile, Alabama to receive vaccines. So the opportunity for us to be able to provide vaccines to our crew so that 100% of the crew can be vaccinated when we welcome guests back on board was a key factor, we believe, in our ability to restart cruising safely. On the 4th of July, Carnival Horizon sailed from Miami for our first sailing. I had the exciting opportunity to be on that ship. And if we go to the next slide, you can see, I think the title says it all. People were so excited to be sailing again. The picture on the right is actually a guest that we asked to cut the ribbon to be the first guest to walk back on the ship. He's taken 200 cruises with Carnival. You can see the fun, the t-shirts, just so much excitement. We all know in the travel industry, there is significant pent-up demand. People want to travel. They want to be out. So I couldn't think of a better day than Independence Day in the US to say that, yes, we are free to cruise again in the US. Now, we're doing so very carefully. You'll notice that there are some photos where people are wearing masks, and that was part of the protocol for the embarkation process, where everyone has to wear a mask in the terminal. We are sailing with essentially all vaccinated. This cruise was probably close to 97% of the guests had been fully vaccinated, which means 14 days after your last dose. And we did have a process by which unvaccinated people could apply and go on a wait list. So many children under the age of 12 can't be vaccinated. They're not eligible. There are people for medical and other reasons that are not vaccinated. So we did have a small number of unvaccinated, but because we're operating with highly vaccinated cruises, no one has to wear a mask on board. And we don't have any physical distancing requirements. So the cruise feels quite normal. All of the unvaccinated guests do have to be tested, not only when they arrive at the terminal to get on the ship, but also 72 hours prior to that. They have to have a PCR test that they bring with them. And they also have to be tested before they debark. So we're managing this very carefully according to all of the protocols and requirements. It was a tough decision for us to go this route because Carnival sails more families with kids than any other cruise line. So, you know, we hope as things move forward and more people are able to be vaccinated, we'll be able to welcome all of those families with kids back on board as well. Now, we've made other upgrades onto the ship, all of the HVAC system, filters, UV, expansion of medical centers, and lots of investment in technology to reduce friction. So as you've seen in restaurants and hotels, QR codes, we're really leveraging what we call our hub app, which 90% of the guests on board use, including for food delivery and food pickup and all of the events and activities. So it was a very, very successful cruise. And I think we've got a quick video that we can share with everybody of the restart.
On behalf of all of us at Carnival, how happy we are to be here today in the Port of Galveston for our first cruise back.
It's a wonderful, wonderful moment, and we are so happy to be back.
We absolutely are back. Yippee!
So you can see we had a great 4th of July, probably the best one I've ever had. And if you go to the next slide, just to give you a recap for the industry, we have, no, next. There you go. 141 ships will be cruising around the world in the month of July. 141 ships from 50 different operators that are set to sail with guests on board. So 5 cruise brands account for nearly half of that capacity. We have 180,000 berths back in service from Carnival, Celebrity, Costa, our sister brand in Italy, MSC Cruises, and Royal Caribbean. Now, we've all learned, I think, many valuable lessons from this terrible pandemic, particularly for the travel industry. Although I think some of the lessons ring true from every other crisis that we've had, which is we've got to continue to tell our story about why travel matters. It matters to every congressional district in this country. It matters to travel agents. It matters to the communities who rely on travel and tourism. And I think the absence and the inability of travel during this pandemic has really brought that to light for so many people who now realize why the freedom to travel is so, so important. Now, I think the cruise industry, we had a lot of protocols already in place, given the fact that we have hospital facilities, medical facilities, public health officers on all of our ships. We already had a program in place with CDC for vessel sanitation. So the ability for us to ramp up and feel very confident about our protocols for health and safety is very high. I think we, like so many, encouraged everyone to get vaccinated. And as I said, all of our crew, as we bring them back, if they're not already vaccinated, we're making that available to them, which is terrific. If we go to the next slide, and you saw a little bit of a shot for our beautiful new Mardi Gras ship, whose first sailing finally will occur on July 31st from Port Canaveral. We've been waiting a long time for this ship. She was delayed and delayed. This is the first LNG, liquefied natural gas propulsion ship, that is coming to the US, to North America. This really reduces our emissions and carbon footprint. There's lots of additional technology on this ship to help us manage food waste, the removal of many of the single-use plastics that were used on ships. So we're very, very focused and committed. The corporation is spending billions of dollars in environmental sustainability for our corporate fleet. Now, we are working to ramp the fleet back up, and we expect by the end of the calendar year, we'll be back at our full fleet of 24 ships. Carnival Celebration will be arriving at the end of 2022. She'll be home ported in Miami, where we broke ground just a few months ago on a purpose-built terminal for Carnival Celebration. We're very excited about celebrating Carnival Cruise Line's 50th birthday. Lots of fun events are celebrations to celebrate that. And we just recently announced that Carnival Cruise Line will be taking on 2 new additional capacity. Costa Magica from our Italian brand will be transformed and converted to become a Carnival Cruise Line ship. And we'll expect to take delivery of her in the middle of 2022. And then we have the delivery of a third, what we call XL class ship, EXCEL. They are really ships that go above and beyond in 2023. And you probably can't see it too well on this photo, but Mardi Gras has the very first roller coaster at sea. So in addition to all the great environmental and sustainability and technology that we have on board, we also have a lot of great guest experiences. Some of them are fan favorites, but the roller coaster is definitely a first. If we go to the last slide, as I close here, I think we are excited and confident that the future of cruising is very bright. We know that we have so much pent-up demand. When I think about all of the cruises and guests that were canceled and continue to rebook and be canceled again, they keep coming back. So we're very, very confident, and that's really what has sustained us through these many, many months. The corporation raised over $23 billion of debt and equity to make sure we could stay afloat. And we have, and I'll tell you that the bookings we have already for 2022 exceed the bookings that we had in 2019 for the future year. So we're very, very grateful for all of the support that we've received from our loyal guests. And, you know, this is one more thing that we're all going to have to figure out how we live with, not just for the cruise industry, but for the broader travel industry and society as well. So as I close here by saying thank you for joining us today and for hearing our story from the cruise industry, I'm going to turn it over to my very good friend, Roger Dow, President and CEO of the U.S. Travel Association, who as a leader has just been stalwart with his team throughout this terrible pandemic, supporting all parts and all segments of the travel industry. So Roger needs no introduction. We all know and love you, Roger. Thank you so much for everything you have done to make sure that the industry comes back better and stronger than ever. Thanks, everybody.
Well, and thank you, Christine. And I love you too. And I actually loved you before you were my national chair. So nothing political in that. So Christine's a great friend, and the news on the cruise industry is really exciting. I mean, the challenge is they were treated so unfairly by CDC compared to other industries. And now seeing them get up on board and seeing the future bookings is very, very exciting for the industry. So thanks, Christine. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Christine, and we really appreciate the update that you've provided on Carnival and the cruise industry as a whole. Is very insightful. Anyone that has questions for Christine, please send them over in the chat box and we'll make sure she gets them, and we'll be sure to follow up with you on that. So Roger, thank you again for joining us and following back up as to where everything is with the industry today.
Always a pleasure. Good to see you again, Morgan, and all my friends from SCAL.
Absolutely, we're delighted. So across the globe, the pandemic, as we know, is still raging in areas, especially in places that have been hit by the Delta variant. How does that complicate the reopening of international travel?
Yeah, when you really look at it, we've got economists predicting that the industry won't come back internationally for 4 years, which is really a challenge. We've had meetings with 3 cabinet officers, Commerce, Homeland Security, and Transportation, along with the airline executives, pushing very hard to reopen international meetings with the White House. We've got 30 organizations that are putting tremendous pressure on them. And the challenge we have is you can't have perfect. And it seems from a political standpoint that no one wants to step out and say, all right, we're going to do this on a risk-based basis, just like we do everything in life. I mean, I can stop car accidents real simple. No one drives starting now, but that's not what we do. So it's these variants are a challenge. I don't take them lightly, but I'm also looking at the hospitalizations and the numbers. It seems like the vaccines work on these variants. The hospitalization numbers are low. And as I say, we need CDC to look at vaccination rates and really follow the science. And we've got to pull the politics out of this, because we've had 3 problems here. One is the health problem, and we're dealing with that, and that's nothing to be made light of. Second is the economic problem, and third is the mental health problem. And I think the second 2 are just as severe and probably more severe in the long term than the first one. So if we don't get our economy going again with international, we don't get people back to work, we're going to have a lot more problems with time to go. So I think it's time to get this thing open, and we're looking for a date specific from the government. What we're saying is, pick a date, and all my SCA colleagues know when you're going to open a restaurant or a hotel, you say, we're going to open on this date, and then you work towards that. If you don't have a date specific, nothing happens. We're putting tremendous pressure on getting the EU open, but most important, the UK-US corridor. The reason for that is because both countries have very high vaccination rates. We have great relationships with them, and we thought it would be announced just prior to the G7, and then the Delta variant popped up, and Boris Johnson delayed things a little bit, but we're hopeful we'll see something soon. Lastly, put it in perspective. If we don't get this thing open by the end of the year, the industry is going to lose $90 billion. That's US, not international, $90 billion. To put it in perspective further, every week that we don't open the EU, UK, and Canada is $1.5 billion US economy and 10,000 US jobs every single week. So that's why it's so important. And we put a blueprint together, shared it with the administration, and we last week shared it with the media. But it's time to pick a date and get this thing moving.
No, absolutely, and I'm really hoping that that comes quite soon. We all know the domestic leisure travel in the U.S. has made a historic comeback, which has been fantastic to see, especially as we came into that 4th of July holiday. So how long until you see business travel following suit?
Well, let me focus what you just said on the domestic leisure. Domestic leisure is really come back strong, just as you said. We've had over 200 million people fly domestically since January, and we can't find one case where people have said, I've gotten on a plane and I got COVID. The Labor Day, over the 4th of July holiday weekend, we had 10 million, a record of the most flights since the pandemic started. And when we look at leisure, 79% of the people say they are going to take a leisure trip this summer. But here's the interesting thing, Morgan, is that 53% say this will be their first trip since last March. First trip since last March. So this pent-up demand that Christine talked about is really important. And I'm going to get to business travel in a minute, but I want to talk, what we did is we dealt with that pent-up demand and created something called the Let's Go There campaign. And Let's Go There was really 75 organizations coming together, chief marketing officer from 75 organizations. So you can imagine herding cats, but everyone was on the same page. And the message was, we're ready when you're ready. And then we shifted that to, it's now time to book, and we'll be shifting that to meetings in a minute I'll talk about. But just before we get to business, why don't you roll the video that we have, the Let's Go There recap video, to give my SCA colleagues an idea of what that was all about.
Public health officials are making an urgent plea to all Americans to avoid the airports, avoid travel altogether, and stay home.
Many seeing an average of just 39 passengers per flight.
I have no plans. I'm not going anywhere.
What can we encourage people to do that's both safe for them and yet productive for the industry? Make plans.
So let's book a trip, because when the time is right, we'll be ready. Let's go there.
The whole industry is getting together on a campaign called Let's Go There, encouraging Americans to plan. And planning, it creates happiness. People love to plan, and they're sick and tired of being cooped up. So I expect this thing to come back, and people should start planning now.
Here's a headline we haven't heard in over a year. Travel is at a pandemic peak.
The race to book vacations, it's full speed ahead.
Domestic leisure travel is returning far faster than most experts predicted.
And what I've been so happy about is that the industry has come together.
Summer domestic travel is picking up greatly. Our big challenge is bringing back international business.
Nothing replaces the one-to-one, face-to-face experience that only meetings and convention give.
There, that gives you an idea of the Let's Go There campaign. Phenomenally successful, billions, with a B, billions of impressions. And that's because we have the capability of the whole industry getting behind this and using all of their channels, the airlines, the hotels, the attractions, using their channels to get the word out. And it really did help people start thinking and planning about travel. Now let's go to business travel. Business travel, again, some experts say 2024. We can't wait for that. I mean, that's just an absurd number, I think, but we do have some challenges. One challenge is the corporate CFOs. You've got corporation CFOs looking back this past year and saying, look at the numbers. we did pretty well and nobody traveled. Look how much money we saved. So that's a challenge we have to face. The second challenge we have is the general counsels at corporations saying, do we really want to tell our people to travel? Maybe they'll get sick and maybe they'll come back and, do litigation against us. So those two things are problems. And then the third problem you add is offices are closed. Many buildings are either closed or they're employees only. So if you want to go call on somebody, that building says, you have to meet them at the Starbucks or somewhere. So that is the problem we're facing. But I think that's going to change very rapidly. It'll start slowly this fall, but I think when people start seeing that, Megan made the personal call and she got the business and Roger sat at home on the internet and he didn't, Roger's going to get on a plane and go and try and recoup that business. So I think that's going to happen. So we'll see that happen. We saw it happen after 2008. Tourism economics has very clear data that shows that those companies that put their people back on the road had much higher revenue, much higher profits. So that's where we're going to go. Surveying business travel companies, 1/3 say they're putting their people back on the road. That means 2/3 aren't. And of that 1/3, it's smaller numbers. So we've got a ways to go, but I think the early movers are going to start getting everybody else going. 4 and 5 decision makers say they believe that face-to-face is the best way to increase revenue and increase profits. So I think we'll start to see that kick in. The other area when it comes to business is so important is the professional meetings and events. Notice I said professionally managed meetings and events. We're starting to use that terminology because we want to separate meetings and events, professionally managed meetings and events, from large gatherings. CDC wants to lump everything together when large people get together, large gatherings get together. But when you think of it, when you have a meeting, you control who is there, you control the registration, you control the seating, you have all the protocols in place that the industry put in place. So we're ready. And so we did is we got together with Ohio State University and their School of Nursing and did a study on how much safer professional meetings and events are than large gatherings, and also the Mayo Clinic, Delta Airlines, and their data. And so we're starting to get the word out, and because we have to again follow the science and the value of in-person meetings, but follow the science. And CDC has been frenetic, quite frankly, about changing rules and guidelines. I mentioned that earlier with the cruise industry. And when you look at in-person gatherings, let's think of it. It's adult education. Without going to a meeting or a convention, after you get out of college, it kind of stops, except what happens in your own organization. It's also the way you sell a product, especially, I think, internationally. If we don't have international visitors coming to the heavy equipment show, to CES, to these big events, they're not buying Dell computers, they're not buying Caterpillar, John Deere tractors, not buying our cars. So that's important. And lastly, it's how you build the relationship and the culture. The only reason that these Zoom meetings like we're on now have worked is because we know each other. We've known each other for decades and we've built up that familiarity. Well, that's a fragile commodity. And if we let that go away, then we've got a problem. So this is so important to bring this back. As I say, I think you're going to see it start slowly. We're looking at Las Vegas is telling me they have no space if anyone wants to even book a large meeting this fall and next year. So the bookings are picking up. So I think we're going to be in good shape, but we've got to demonstrate. And every time we have a meeting, we should talk about it. And we've got to be our best proponents of it. We've got to meet. We've got a board meeting coming up next week in Colorado Springs, and it'll be much larger attendance than we had in 2019, which is very interesting because I think our industry just wants to get out, and I think everyone else wants to get out face to face. I was at MPI's meeting recently, and they had over 1,000 people. So we're seeing these meetings start, and if we don't start it, no one else will.
We have to, I guess you could say, follow our own footsteps and follow our own tunes and what we're saying. So definitely those are some great words, and you are exactly right. Once that one person gets that contract and they're in that door, the rest will start to follow. So but we have to talk about it, and we have to be open as to when we're traveling and doing those things. So absolutely. But as we know, and you've talked about it many times, is that the travel industry had bore the huge brunt of all of most of the job losses and the economic devastation that was brought on by the pandemic. And you've done a great job about talking about that and the numbers. What is U.S. Travel doing and advocating for to help rebuild our industry? And we know that you've done so much, so I guess talk a little bit about all that.
Well, we've got a piece of legislation that's going through the House, and it's called the Hospitality and Commerce Jobs Recovery Act. And that's really important because when you look at jobs, we had 17 million people in this industry, workers, in 2019. In March and April, that dropped by 8 million, 51%. As I've said before, the Great Depression, the worst year was 1933, and that was 26%. 65% of all the unemployed are still in our industry. In June, we just added another 300,000 jobs. So they're coming back, and we'll talk about jobs in a little bit, but we've been the hardest hit. So this Hospitality Jobs and Commerce Jobs Recovery Act has 90 co-sponsors and growing. So I'd ask all my colleagues to, if you know someone, ask them if they've signed on to the Hospitality and Commerce Jobs Recovery Act. If they haven't, tell them to, because what's in there? It's a tax credit for middle income folks to travel. And that sounds counterintuitive. Why should you give someone a tax credit to travel? Well, it primes the pump. These people have a lot of saved up money. They've had their stimulus checks. If you go to a mall, stand outside the Gucci store or the Louis Vuitton store and see the lines of people, those same people want to travel. So give them a tax credit. Will help them travel. And what happens? More people go to work, more people pay income tax, et cetera. So it's actually quite additive. It also restores the business and entertainment tax ability to deduct that from taxes. It's really been, I thought, kind of silly over the years. If you have a box at, let's say, the National Stadium in Washington, you can pay for the box and deduct that as a business expense, but you can't deduct the hot dog that your client eats. And that seems weird to me. And lastly, there's a tax credit in there for trade shows and conventions for things that they've had to do to recover from the pandemic. So if we can get this thing passed, it basically is going to bring about $600 billion to the travel economy and another 1.5 million jobs. So that's a critical thing that we're working on very much, in addition to getting international opened up as some of our highest priorities.
So how can the folks that are on the call today, how can they be involved to help you push that forward, and how can they help with the industry?
Well, they can look on our website and they can see who signed on to this, or they don't even have to. Just reach out to your congressman. I mean, and just say, have you signed on to the Hospitality and Commerce Jobs Recovery Act? If you haven't, please do. And I think the voice of small businesses is going to be important. You know, a lot of people in Congress are looking, well, the airlines got some money to recover, and we did the PPPs and all that, but it's the small businesses. We've got to really lean on the restaurants, the shops. Here's an interesting thing. I got a call last night from Fox News about 9 o'clock at night. Said, can you go on the air in 1 minute? I said, yeah, I guess so. And they wanted to talk about the All-Star game. And they said, what is the impact of the All-Star game moving out of Atlanta? And they said it's ranged from 60 million to 200 million. I said, I don't really know. I said, but the experts are saying about 70 million. But I said, they're looking at the one-day revenue from that game. I said, the thing they're missing is all the benefit that goes to a city when you host an All-Star game or Super Bowl or something like that. The weeks before of the pre-game shows, the advertising, the city tours, the things that they do, interviews in restaurants of people, and people say, I'd like to go there. I said, they miss out on all that. They miss out on the person who goes to the game even saying, hey, let's go back to Atlanta. So I think we can't just look at the event itself. So I think it's important that we really stress the small businesses and go to your congresspeople and say, please get on this. This is about our economy. If we don't bring back the U.S. travel industry, we're not going to bring back the economy. So it's very important for our folks to do.
Absolutely, and thank you for the additional advice. There was a few people that were asking how we could get involved, how they can get involved to help. So thank you. So what is the outlook for something getting done with infrastructure? And if so, how's U.S. Travel helping to shape all this legislation?
Well, the infrastructure bill, as you've been watching, it's been all over the board, from trillions of dollars down to a reasonable amount, we believe. It's been a big part of our policy platform. We've got to restore our infrastructure, and in fact, I'm hearing members of Congress talk about our decaying infrastructure and our airports not having airports in the top 25 where we used to have 20 of the top 25 20 years ago. The future of mobility is so important. It's changing before our eyes, and the ability for electrification and things like that, our biometrics and all that. So we've got 20 bipartisan senators that are basically pushing very hard for passing the infrastructure bill with a focus on infrastructure dollars. Let's spend the money. Again, it's hard to do in Washington, but let's get the politics out of this and let's stop kicking the can down the road. I'm kind of confident that we're going to see the first infrastructure bill in decades. And we've been on this infrastructure rant for the past 20 years, and each administration says, yeah, we're going to do something about it, but nothing happens. I think we're on the cusp of finally seeing something happen, and it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, the problem, though, you'll pass this an infrastructure bill, but as you know, being around Washington, it takes forever to get the zoning, to get the permits, and to get the money put together. So it's not something, as Christine said, turn on a switch for cruise lines. Infrastructure takes a long, long time, and we've got to get word on that. So, and the thing that we added is we added the voice of the U.S. travel industry to the infrastructure bill to look at things that would facilitate and improve travel as being very important. Years ago, I had the head of the Myrtle Beach Convention and Visitors Bureau say, I don't compete with Virginia Beach, I don't compete with Charleston, I compete with the highway system. And he said that highway system is the biggest inhibitor of people coming to my destination. So we've got to get our infrastructure back. It's what built the whole economy in the first place over the past 50 years.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that there's progress, and to your point, it's been a long time. So I'm hoping that it comes through. And very much like the pandemic, we've all seen good things come out of the pandemic. A lot of people have done new things. So what are some trends that you think are here to stay, and what is your outlook for the future as we start to come out of the pandemic?
I think a lot of positive things that come out of the pandemic. Christine stated many from the cruise lines. When you think of it, pandemic, we've gotten to a distribution system where you can get anything delivered anywhere, no matter where you are, or people, whether it be food, whether it be products, or people are used to be able to get something and get it fast. So that's been a plus. The personalization. I think there's some very interesting things going on. I've heard of one hotel brand that you can now book connecting rooms. Seems like a no-brainer, but they've got the technology now. You can book and say, I want a connecting room. Someone with children wants to have a connecting room, and it used to be, we'll try when you check in, we'll see what we can do. Now they're putting the technology in. So the touchless capability, your phone, your ability to pay your bill, to check into your room, all of that is going to be the next generation of hotel locks and things like that. All the protocols we put in. I was at a Travel Weekly event that was at Pebble Beach recently, and I saw buffets coming back. And I was told beforehand the buffets were history. I don't think so, but I'm watching protocols that they put in place to be able to do buffets. And so I think that's going to be a big point. And also remote. There's a lot of talk that with people working remotely, they're going to want to stay home. There's another side to remote. I'm talking to you right now from Steamboat Springs, Colorado, where we have a home, and I'm there. So I'm doing business, but from Steamboat Springs instead of Washington, D.C. And I think there's a huge opportunity for the travel industry to talk about those that are able to do business remote. Well, why don't you do it from your travel location? Why don't you do it somewhere there? Do you have the ability to bring children along in the homeschooling? So I think a lot of those things versus just doing it at home, I think there are a lot of the pluses. And lastly, I think it really gave a shot in the arm to biometrics. We've been pushing very hard to get biometrics, to get people through airports faster and all that. And I think we've come of age that biometrics are going to be the next thing that are going to be important, from checking into a hotel to getting through an airport rapidly and efficiently.
No, absolutely. I mean, I work remotely and have for quite a few years, and you make a great point about being able to work in different destinations. And it also provides you the opportunity to meet people while you're in those destinations as well. So it's definitely, I think, a way of the future when you're looking at remote work. And one thing that I know that you've talked a lot about, and I think we've all experienced it, at some level of in our current work situations is the workforce shortages that the industry is facing, but also the whole country. What are you seeing and hearing from your members around the challenges in maintaining their workforce and hiring to meet up the demand? Because there's been some that have had to turn away business because they don't have enough of a workforce to keep up with the demand. And what should our industry do to help with this rebuild?
Well, it is, I think, the biggest problem our industry is going to face going forward. People have been talking about, bringing people back to travel and international and all of that, and they're all critical, but it's the workforce. It's a major issue. If you just look last week, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Forbes, all had stories about the workforce and travel economy. The stories read something like this. Of the people that are out of the workforce from the travel economy, 50% will not go back to work. And they state reasons of being people saying, I found another job. I decided I want to go to another industry. This might be too fragile. So we've got a big job to do on this workforce. Is we've got 4 or 5 million unemployed people, right, and open jobs. And it's everywhere you look. I went to a car wash yesterday here in Steamboat Springs. We keep a car and it gets all dusty, from sitting there in the garage. And I went to the car wash and I said, "Can you vacuum it?" And the guy said, "I wished I could. We don't have any help. I'm trying to get more help. I've closed down my detail capability." Hotels here. I was talking to a couple of hotel owners here in Steamboat. They're showing sold out, but yet I didn't see a lot of people in their lobby. And I said, "Are you really sold out?" They said, "We're sold out for what we can handle." We saw an announcement yesterday that Hilton is going to go on request for daily housekeeping service. Marriott is going to say, pick the service you want. So we're seeing that change. And then the other thing we have, I think, working against this is the demographics. I think we truly have a generational issue here to deal with. Many of us, you're a lot younger than I am, but many of us and my colleagues grew up in this industry, and we just would work wherever they wanted us, when they told us, whenever they said, you want to go here, weekends, whatever. And you've got the millennial generation saying, not going to do that anymore. I'm going to have that work-life balance. So I think we got a generational issue because over 30% of all the workforce are millennials. And I think we've got to, I've been on task force with the US Chamber and other places, and all I hear is that from CEOs, the same old things. They say, well, we'll have to pay them more. Oh, why don't we give them incentives to come to work? Why don't we give them promotional incentives? And I think we've got to think way beyond that. We've got to look at a different way of approaching the workforce, and as happened in so many other areas of our economy. And because this problem is here to stay, and if we don't solve it, you're going to get hotels that can say, I can only open at 70%. I was a Domino's pizza person the other day. An owner has a bunch of Domino's. He was working the Domino's himself in the oven. He said, I'm getting my hands burned. He said, I forget how to do this. He said, I can't even find 2 people. He said, I turned down 80% of my orders. And so unless we fix this workforce thing, it will be the biggest issue we're going to face in the coming decade.
No, absolutely. And I know many are struggling with it and experiencing it. So it is a huge issue, and hopefully it's something we can get resolved sooner rather than later. So if anyone has any questions for Roger, please feel free to put them in the question box and we'll get them over to him to answer. One question that came in from a colleague Moxing out in California is that there a prediction you would make as to a date of the US opening to the EU?
Yes, I am going to make a prediction that we're going to see a date specific announced. I'm hoping by the end of this month or August. As I say, we're putting tremendous pressure, and we've got, in fact, Senator Rosen from Nevada and Senator Rick Scott from Florida are heading up and putting tremendous pressure on the Biden administration to say we've got to get on with this. So I am very, very hopeful that we will see a date specific announced very soon. And as I say, we just keep turning up the heat. There is no reason that we can't handle this, and because it's going to be with us forever. We have Ebola, we have swine flu, we have leprosy in the world, and have for hundreds of years. And these things, you learn to deal with them, you get the vaccination, all that. And we have to do the same thing as an economy, is say, okay, and I'm looking at the counts of hospitalization to get behind us. But I think it's very important that, as I said earlier, that we get that date specific. So I'm pushing. And from California, your question is a very good one. Thankfully, California and Nevada and New York finally came back and said, we're going to go to full capacity to open up. And I'm to be quite honest with you, I think that was a lot of political pressure of folks saying, look at Florida. I live in Florida and DC, and Florida's been wide open. The businesses are open, the restaurants are surviving. And I think people in other states look at that and say, wait a minute, their case counts are no different. We've got to deal with this thing. So I'm very hopeful that we're going to see a date specific within the next month. And I say that with great need, because we have our big event IPW happening in late September. And until we can get that date announced, people really want to come, but they're just waiting for the clearance that they can.
Oh, let's hope that they can, especially with the big event. So John Mavros has asked, Senator Rand Paul recently estimated nearly 100 million Americans have recovered from COVID. My wife and I recovered in February. Their doctor does not recommend we be vaccinated, as we have had a blood test proving we have antibodies. Recognizing the tens of millions with antibodies must be a part of returning to normal. How can we help?
I couldn't agree more. I think I know a lot of medical experts that are saying that precise thing, that if you've had COVID and recovered, you have antibodies. And those antibodies, they actually, just like chickenpox and measles and other things, they actually go into your bone marrow and lay dormant. And then if a virus attacks, they come out in force. So if those folks have natural immunity, I've also heard medical experts say that someone who has had COVID and recovered is at a higher risk of being vaccinated. So I think what we've got to do, we've got to look at all sorts of ways of opening the economy. Have you been vaccinated? Have you had COVID and recovered? Have you had a test? And it can't be one size fits all. And one of the things that worries me is, if on calls I'm on with the EU, they're just pushing extremely hard for a vaccine passport and the only way to get on a plane. Now, we've been on record and saying we're okay with opening up to people come to the United States initially to be vaccinated, but it's a slippery slope. If you put a criteria in that you must have proof of vaccination, and when you know that 30–40% may not be vaccinated, but yet have had COVID and recovered and have natural immunity. So I think we've got to get the medical community, and I think the CDC and the government is reticent to do that, because they're pushing so hard. They want to get to that 70% plus immunization vaccine level. The other thing is, we've done some research through destination analysts, and the people who travel are much more highly vaccinated than people that don't, by about 20% more. In other words, we're sitting at some 60% of 67% of US population. Travelers are about 78–79%. Seeing the same thing in Europe. People have a propensity to travel, and you think about it. Someone that wants to travel and wants to travel internationally or travel will most likely get the vaccine, versus a farmer somewhere says, why am I going to do this? And because I don't travel and I'm always outdoors and all that. So I think we need multiple ways, but I totally agree with that perspective. We need the medical community to be honest and talk about COVID survivors and their antibodies.
No, absolutely. It's a fantastic point. Mark Ergang from SCAL Long Island, I just wanted to say thank you for all that you have done, your leadership, your efforts for the travel and tourism industry, specifically over the year and a half. And just wanted to say that it was great to see you over these years, because he worked with you at Marriott for quite a few years. So he just wanted to say hello and say thank you for your amazing passion for our industry and all that you've done.
Well, thank you, and a good friend and a former Marriott colleague. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Gail Welsh from SCAL Northern New Jersey just is asking, what can you tell us about processing passports? They're saying it's about 16 weeks to process.
Yes, and that's another challenge we have. You take all of these government entities, whether it be getting a driver's license or getting a passport, whether the driver's license on the state and local level, passports, it's going to be a while to bring them back. And we're talking to DHS and to state to say you've got to really ramp up to take on the demand. They don't know what's going to hit them. When this, I've talked a lot about the negative challenge we face, but I'm very optimistic. I see this industry as a coiled spring. September 11th, the predictions were that no one would travel overseas again because of fear of flying and getting their plane blown up. After the recession 2008, every predictor said 30% of the hotels in America, especially in major cities, will close, never to open again. Both were wrong. And I think the same thing's going to happen. I think when this thing comes back, it's coming back faster. And it's one of my concerns is, can we handle the volume? Can TSA handle the volume? And you can't just throw more people at it. We've got to get more technology. But the ability to get the passports and all these things issued, there's a backlog, and there's going to be a backlog, and the government has to understand this is coming, and it's going to come at them very, very fast.
No, absolutely, and it's going to be interesting as travel continues to pick up how much more is going to happen. Keith Wolling from Scholar Orlando says, "Thank you for all of your efforts. What are you hearing about with the Canadian border? Vaccines are much slower up north. Just if you had any updates."
Yeah, we're again pushing very hard on the Canadian border. If you look at the 80 million international visitors, fully 24 million of them came from Canada. As I mentioned, I live in St. Petersburg, Florida, and Washington, D.C. And this past year, all the condominium buildings in downtown St. Petersburg, the lights were out. And you'd normally be sitting on the sidewalk between December and April, and you'd hear German, you'd hear a Canadian accent and all that. You didn't hear that this year. So there's a tremendous pent-up demand. The Canadian government is moving forward more better than they had been. I mean, they had been very reticent to open anything. And if you're traveling from Canada, then when you returned as a Canadian citizen, you had to be pay for your own quarantine. That they relaxed on that. So we're putting a lot of pressure on Schumer, and some others are being very helpful, the people in the border states. So hopefully Canada is starting to begin moving, because as you look at it, as I said, I talk about the health crisis and the economic crisis. $1 billion a day comes across that border, and we've just basically shut that down. And we can't go a long time without opening up that very, very important border between the U.S., not only for travel, but for everything else we do.
Yeah, and I say it's a good sign when, for example, Porter Airlines completely shut down operations, and they've announced that they will pick up all routes, and including some additional ones by October. They'll start in September. So when you see that type of news, you feel confident with the border and the fact that they will be picking back up their U.S. routes as well. So that is some good welcome news. Burchan Turkan, our SCAL International Senior Vice President from SCAL Atlanta, has asked about international staffing, which has also been limited due to the pandemic, but this is resolving as U.S. embassies open up globally. That is another reason properties are suffering. Would U.S. travel be interested in supporting a special short visa exchange programs offered by the U.S. State Department?
We would. One of the challenges with opening up international is not just for the travelers who spend a lot of money and stay a long time, but it's the workers, the B1, the B2 visas. The numbers have been, so far down, and that's one of the major important issues to have those workers. Not only do they come and fill a gap where in some areas, I think of Mackinac Island, there are not enough people that live on Mackinac Island to help at the Grand and all that, and they depend so much on these temporary workers, and we've got to get that back up to speed, and it can be very helpful. And the other thing that happens is when these people come as temporary workers, they look at America, they look at our values and all that, and they say, that's a pretty good place to live. I like that. And so it's also part of our public diplomacy. But yes, we would be very supportive of that. This workforce issue, as I say, is a major issue, and if anything like that, short-term visas and all that could be helpful, we would be supportive of that.
Excellent. That's fantastic to hear. Gail Welsh from SCAL Northern New Jersey again. She's saying, I'm a travel industry recruiter, and I'm seeing a big uptick in meetings and incentive travel. Some of the issues are airlift. When do you think the airlines will be back up to normal lift capacity?
The airlines are all poised to come back to capacity very quickly. The number of planes that they have that have been basically, as Christine mentioned earlier, you can't mothball a ship, but you can a plane, are sitting there. United's recent order of 200 new planes. Now, what it takes fully a month to 6 weeks for an airline to come back. In other words, let's say tomorrow we opened up everything. Well, our major airlines can't recover for another month. They've got to get the reservation system up to speed. They've got to get the people back. They've been furloughed back to work. They've got to get the aircraft. They've got the scheduling done. So that takes a little while. It just doesn't happen overnight. But I see that coming. The airlines want this very badly. All the major airlines are predicting that they're going to be in the black at the end of the summer. That's very good news. And when they're in the black, then the investment starts with new aircraft and new routes. But a lot of areas have severely hurt, where secondary routes have been pulled out of areas and that really depend on the airline lift for resorts and all that. And airlines have pulled out of those, and those areas need to get that lift back, because they're destinations that not only are drive markets, but they really depend on an airlift from regional airlines and all that has just virtually disappeared, and they've got to bring that back. By the way, Gail, I don't know where you're from in northern New Jersey. I grew up in Ridgewood, Bergen County, so remember it very well. I'm sure you and I probably went to the fireplace over the years for a hamburger or two.
Oh, how fun. Well, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for submitting your great questions over to Roger. And Roger, thank you so much for your update today. We always appreciate it. And again, thank you to Christine for joining us and providing a great update on the cruise industry. It was very helpful and insightful. And Gail wrote back saying she grew up in Kearney and now is in Cream Ridge.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. And Morgan, thanks for what you do. Really appreciate it. You make this easy. And all my colleagues, thanks for what you do. You're the voice, you're the backbone of this industry. And your voice and your seasoned experience is so critical. And so keep it up. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And Jim, would you like to come on and say some final closing thoughts?
I would. Thanks, Morgan. And Roger, invaluable information. Can't appreciate it more. It's just brilliant. The questions we got today were excellent questions, and your answers were right on spot. Thank you very, very much. Again, Jersey boys sticking together. I hope you'll be back with us later this year in the fourth quarter with more updates as things evolve and evolve positively. And I want to thank all the viewers today. You got a great amount of wonderful information, and we'll continue to do it for you as much as we can. I think we're going to take a break for the month of August and hopefully be back with you in September. Just look for your updates either on social media. We'll send you an email. And thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the week. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you.